Okay. So, and the cycle we go through the entire year, and it goes week by week. And the only time we don't read a Torah portion in this regular cycle of completing the Torah in a year is when a holiday falls on Shabbos, and then we read the holiday reading, and we bump the Torah reading to another week. 2 weeks ago, the first day of Passover was a Shabbos, and therefore we didn't read the regular Torah portion. Yesterday was the last day of Passover, also a Yom Tiv, and therefore we didn't read the regular Torah reading. So, right now, what I want to do is talk about the Torah portion that we'll be reading this coming Shabbos, which is actually probably more of a norm in how we do it. What we've been doing is a little bit outside of at least my norm, and we'll see if we can continue that. Just for your fun facts, in Israel, they did read it yesterday, because yesterday the Torah Passover is 7 days biblically, and the eighth day is added outside of Israel. So for a few weeks, we're not going to be reading the same thing on Shabbos as they are in Israel. We'll catch up soon. It'll be a double portion.
Mindy?
Yes.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Does everybody do the Mashiach dinner, or is it just a Chabad tradition?
It's primarily Chabad. It was Hasidic in the old day, but at its core. But it's today, as far as I know, it's Chabad. Okay. So the Torah portion is largely about Yom Kippur, and it's what we're going to read this coming Shabbos is what we read in the synagogue on Yom Kippur. Because, as I say, on holidays we have a reading, and it's opposed to the day. So the Yom Kippur has a very special service to it. Yom Kippur is described by the Torah as the Achas B'Shana. It's the 1 day a year. It's seen as the pinnacle of holiness. It's called Shabbaton, like the Shabbos of Shabbos is the Shabbat of Shabbats. It's really top of the heap when we're talking about as far as the intrinsic holiness of a day. And there were services, and there's services all year were done primarily by the clans of Kohens, who were functionaries in the temple. There were some special services that were done only on Yom Kippur, and it was only on Yom Kippur that would go into the Holy of Holies, and all that was done. Those specific those Yom Kippur services were out of the ordinary, and out of the ordinary is that the service was done by the Kohen Gadol, the high priest, also. And for those who stay in synagogue after Yizkor, and that's, I know that's a smaller demographic, that's a lot of the service after Yizkor. The most of service is about the service of Yom Kippur. I don't want to get today into the service of Yom Kippur. I would like to, but we're not going to get into that. We're going to delve into some elements of both the Kohen Gadol, the high priest, and of purity, and how it relates to us today. We're 6 months away from Yom Kippur, but today is the day when we read the Torah, and there are certainly lessons relevant for us today too. So, want to share the screen. Okay. It's in the Torah portion that we're going to be reading, as I said, we read it in Yom Kippur too. It says, Aaron shall bring his sin offering bull and initiate atonement for himself and for his home. This is in Leviticus. Now, atonement for himself, right? And it also says, by the way, for the people. I just didn't go, I should have done ... It does say he's a human being. He's got to find cleansing for himself, and he's representing the people. He's representative of the nation. He's the top religious functionary. It's for the people too. But what we're going to focus on now is the fact that it says for himself and for his home. Now, what does it mean for his home? The Talmud tells us the sages interpreted the term his home to mean his wife. That it's not only for him and for the people, which would include his family too, it says specifically his wife. And from that, we have the commentaries on the Torah, look at it, and they say the Yom Kippur service was performed by a married high priest. As it is stated, he shall atone for himself in his home, and the meaning of his household is his wife. So here's a point I want to delve into first. The high priest was, again, the top religious functionary, and we don't have our priests. To us, it's a mitzvah to get married, and therefore there's nobody that's holy. It's obviously different than other disciplines in the world that we know very well, where a priest, a person who's dedicated to spirituality, will not get married. They're here, but to us, getting married is part of our sanctity, part of holiness, part of what God wants of us, and therefore there's nobody who doesn't get married by design. And the high priest also will get married. Here, what happens if this high priest is not married? Right? Not everybody can find someone, or maybe something, God forbid, his wife passed away. In Jewish law, based on what the Torah says here, Yom Kippur, he must be married. In order for and there was always an understudy, a deputy high priest who could step in. The high priest who did the service on Yom Kippur had to be specifically had to be married. Now, so we'll go back with a second. Now, what it also says in the Talmud there is in note number 4, it says 7 days prior to Yom Kippur, the sages would remove the high priest from his home. So this is a little bit funny. The high priest was, a very holy person, the top of the food chain in our religious functionaries. And this is a person who's preparing now for Yom Kippur, the holiest day of the year. One of the things of Yom Kippur is abstaining from certain physical pleasures. We don't eat, drink. Marital intimacy is prohibited in Yom Kippur. These are all good things. We're supposed to eat, drink, and marital intimacy. All are good things. But Yom Kippur is a day that there's more of this devotion to God and disengaging from the more self side of things that may be very good, but there's certainly the possibility or the unavoidable personal side and the serving of self-indulgence. So the high priest is told to be separate, not to engage for a week before Yom Kippur, not to engage in marital intimacy. So the idea of the marital intimacy, which is a holy thing, we see it as a holy thing. There's a focus on Yom Kippur, but yet we say that if he wasn't married, he can't serve in the temple. He can't serve the Yom Kippur. So it seems a little bit of a paradox. If there's on the one hand to say if you're not married, you're not suited for this high service. On the other hand, say, but right now, don't engage in the physical intimacy side of things. So, what does this mean? Now, before we go further, just to take a look also, here it says, initiate atonement for himself and for his home, in note number 1. In Torah, there's a lot of in Torah, written in shorthand. There's a lot of alluding to different things or different phrases, and we have pages and pages and pages of law, not spelled out but alluded to by a turn of phrase. But in this specific one, if he wanted to say for his home means his wife, it's just one word. He could have said his home or his wife. So it's interesting that they would call it, that the Torah would choose to call the wife the home, and it doesn't save us anything. It's not a huge law that's going to take pages and pages, and we hinted at it one word. We used one word to hint at another word. And we're going to get back to that in a minute. First, let's take a look at the whole idea of the holiness and the high standards of Yom Kippur and the high priest. When we drill down into Jewish law, and the Rebbe is quoting earlier or thinkers, is drilled down to Jewish law. A lot of times there's a lot of hair splitting, and hair splitting for a reason, because we're trying to understand the essence of what's going on. We know what the Torah is describing. So there are, I'll take this off for a second. There are two ways of multiple ways, but two ways of looking at what goes on in Yom Kippur. Let's look at the service in the temple. We say Yom Kippur is a very holy day with an absolutely top of the line holy service. And because Yom Kippur is such a holy service, therefore we need the holiest functionary in the Jewish people doing to be able to attend to these services, and that holy functionary has to be at tip-top shape, which means he has to be married. The rest of the year he can function without being married, but he needs, in order for him to meet the bill of what the Yom Kippur service needs, he's got to be married. That's one thing, one way of looking at it. Or we say that Yom Kippur is a time when we, as a people, are, because of the holiness of the day, we are at our finest. It's not the service that's the finest, it's that we are at our finest. And in this case, we're talking about the high priest. If the high priest is going to function in the temple on Yom Kippur, well, it's a day when we are at our spirituality is at full voltage, and therefore it's a day he's going to have to be married. It's not so much that the sanctity of the service demands this married high priest, is that the high priest is not the high priest on that day. He's not really who he needs to be if he's not married, and he's the one who's supposed to be doing the service. So it's more about the sanctity of the individual than of the service. And this is how I just translated how the Rebbe. 1 second, share screen. This is from the Rebbe and page 5. Note number 5. There are two ways of understanding the Torah mandate for the high priest on Yom Kippur to be married. A, the Yom Kippur service is so holy that it requires the officiant to be not an ordinary priest, but the high priest. And the high priest must have the additional asset of being married. So the focus is on this is such a holy service in a holy place on a holy day. And now we got to, but that's what really is the message, the most salient factor here. And therefore we need a high priest, and a high priest at full voltage being married. Or is the focus not so much on the service, but on us, on the individuals? In this case, it's the individual high priest. In order for the high priest to be fit for the service of such a whole day, must have the advantage of being married. The practical difference would be with regard to the daily rituals, which are also done on Yom Kippur. So let me just take this away for a second. Every day there are services in the temple. Every day the menorah is lit. Every day there's an opening offering. Every day there's a closing offering. There are certain things that happen every single day of the year. Shabbos, Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, Hanukkah, Purim, regular Tuesday, it's always the same. And then what happens in between could be a different day to day. So what the Rebbe is saying here, and he's quoting the earlier greats, saying if the need for the and I hope I'm not being too arcane about this. Please ask if there's any need for clarification. If this is all about the service of Yom Kippur, and the service of Yom Kippur needs not only a Kohen Gadol, a high priest, but a married high priest, then the only services of the day that should need the high priest, the married high priest, are the rituals that are peculiar to Yom Kippur. But the lighting the menorah, the things that are daily things, that's not Yom Kippur service, it's a daily service. And any other Kohen should be able to do that. And if it's really all about the Yom Kippur service. But Maimonides, as you see in note 6, oh no, I didn't finish to get to this. I'm sorry. Practicalism will get there before the end of note 5. The practical difference with regard to daily rituals, which are also done in Yom Kippur, one would say that the first view would say that an unmarried high priest could perform them that day. The daily rituals, the non-Yom Kippur specific rituals. Well, it's not what's holy about there's Yom Kippur. If the focus is on the Yom Kippur service is very distinct. But there are other things that are just regular. So if it's about the power of the Yom Kippur service, then we should only need the married high priest for that. While the second opinion, who believes that it's really all about the high priest being in tip-top shape, believe that everything done that day requires a married high priest. Whatever the high priest is doing needs to be done properly, and if he's doing the service, he needs to be a married high priest. So Maimonides writes in note 6, as a matter of law, all of the services performed on this day, the offering of the daily incense offering, the kindling of the menorahs, lamps, all are performed by a married high priest. So it's clear that in Jewish law, it is about, a married high priest is the one who's doing, everything is done by him, and therefore, they underscore a married high priest, and therefore it's using our question before of what is the most important, what's driving the bus in the service of Yom Kippur. It's about the persona of the high priest. Of course, it's a holy service of Yom Kippur, but we're looking now at what makes the high priest really whole, and we say that for this day, he's got to be married. He can do the service 364 days a year in the temple, but this day, if he's not married, we're going to have to get his understudy, assuming he is. So, what is the deal with being married for him? Or what are they referring to? So I want to go back to what I mentioned before, which is that we use the term the high priest's home to mean his wife, when we just as easily have said it wouldn't have been any extra even letter to say wife as distinct from home. So take a look, the way that Rebbe looked at it, to say, take a look at this piece of Talmud in the Tractate Shabbat. It says, Rabbi Yossi said, this is a half a page of Talmud where Rabbi Yossi is being spoken about as a person of great stature and great insight and great moral bearing. And it says some really nice things about him. And it quotes one of the nice things about him, one of the very outstanding special things about him. It says, Rabbi Yossi said, in all my days, I did not call my wife, rather I called my wife my home, because she is the essence of the home. So whatever he said, his idea was that he always saw in his wife his household. Now what does that mean? That can be interpreted in different ways. Here it's seen as obviously as a very valuable thing, because it's a part of a litany of things which says some special things about him. So what's so special about this? Now, on the one hand, because on the other hand, if you say someone, my home, what do you mean my homemaker? Is this, but what about the relationship? And if you look in Deuteronomy, and spell this, Deuteronomy, it says, it's so clear, it says that in the first year of marriage, as we start off marriage, and this is something that is very important in the Torah way of thinking about marriage, that at least for the first year, because of the first year, presumably, before life really kicks in and a lot of the distractions come, the Torah explicitly says that he shall remain free for his home for 1 year and delight his wife. It says this is about going to war in times of war. It says a person who just got married, but in the first year of marriage does not go to war. Stays home, and the mitzvah is delight the wife. Make your wife happy. Show love, romance. It's a Torah idea. So if we're talking about romance, which is a Torah value, then what's the deal with looking at a wife as a home? What's so great about Rabbi Yossi calling his wife his home? So the idea that I think I would generally try to bring across to any bride and groom who's discussing marriage with me, and or either under the chuppah or before the chuppah, is that when we get married, of course, we fall in love with someone, and the romance and the emotion and the expressions of love are all part of what we need to do, because we're human beings, and we should be expressing ourselves and expressing our care and expressing our love and letting a loved one know how we care. That's basic, and the Torah it underscores it. It says in this first year, especially, don't get it while you're building the relationship. Even though there's a communal need, they're going to war, you stay home and focus on your relationship. And he says, make your wife happy. In other words, show your love. But in the big picture, at the same time, in the big picture, what happens when two people are getting married? Two people are getting married. It's not just about, oh, I found someone who I love. That is more about my sense of happiness. It's our sense of happiness. It's it's a contentment. It's a beautiful thing. But the Torah also tells us you want to anchor that in a certain amount of gravitas, to say you are now a new unit. You are a unit. You are now joined as souls, and you have a mission. When two individuals walk under a chuppah, they leave conceptually, first of all, not as two individuals, of course, they're still two different people, but they're two individuals joined in a mission to make their mark on the world, because everybody has a mission. Everybody has a mark to make on the world. And they are now a family. These two people, they are now a family, and they have a mission in the world. And the chuppah that's above them represents the responsibility to that mission. And when they walk out of the chuppah, they walk out with hopefully a sense of purpose, to be able to bring wholeness to a world that needs it, or to make their specific mark on the world, because each one, we're all individuals. So what Rabbi Yossi was saying is that he had the vision to see in his wife not only what made him fall in love, but made him fall in love, that could be also, she makes me laugh. She makes me feel good. She's cute, whatever. Those are all wonderful things, beautiful things. But in a way, they are more about what they do for me. The idea of recognizing that this is my partner, that we together are going to make an impact on the world, a sense of responsibility, it doesn't ignore the first, but it deepens it. It anchors it in gravitas, in responsibility, in joint giving to the world, not only joint getting from each other. And to look at what he said, it says, so here, when it says he saw, I did not call my wife, she's the essence. It says he saw, when he looked at his wife, it says he was able to see not only what she does for him, but what she together with him can bring to the world, and how he needs her to help to do his part in the world, and how it's his job to help her bring out hers. And seeing that, it says, who is wise? The Talmud tells us, one who sees what will eventually develop. And elsewhere the Medrash tells us, seeing is incomparable to hearing. So for us to look at a spouse, or Rabbi Yossi to look at a spouse and to see the pleasure and the joy she brings to him, that's going to be right in front of his face. He had the spiritual maturity to be able to look at his wife and not only see how beautiful she is, what she brought to his life, whatever it is that she was adding to the quality of his life, he was able to envision, not only in his mind, but to see in her the value of what she brought to the world. and what they together were destined to bring to the world. That level of maturity is what as the Rebbe is offering as an interpretation, is what the Torah is describing as to what we wanted from Aaron on the day of from the high priest. It was Aaron in the scripture, but it obviously was the high priest later after Aaron passed away. Whoever the high priest was, that level of spiritual maturity we need from him on Yom Kippur. Someone who is engaged in the world, is engaged in a relationship, engaged in a loving relationship, God willing, and a relationship which fills his needs and in which he fills in others' needs. But he's able to not only know theoretically or academically, but to be able to see in her his home, to be able to see that she's not just a wonderful roommate and partner in the things we do. She's we are together, we have formed a family. Even if they have no kids, maybe. Together we are a household, and I see in her, without her, my mission in the world is not going to be complete because I'm married to her. We together, we formed a unit to be able to impact the world. And so what the Torah is telling us is that Yom Kippur is a day when the force of the holiness, it brings out our best selves, which could come out on a regular Sunday in April, because our best selves, it's questions if we trigger it, but Yom Kippur helps trigger that holiness, that innate wholeness, to the extent where because the high priest is a human being and a spiritual human being and a role model for the people, when he was going to be going through these very sacred services on Yom Kippur, that one day of the year, in front of the people, it had to come home to the people that we're looking at who we can be. I can't be a Kohen, but I can be a consummate human being. And a consummate human being is someone who's initiating atonement to God, not only for himself and for the people, but in looking at himself, he's also looking at his spouse in one shot, because that's his home. And the home is psychologically an anchor. So that is the one element of the Torah portion. Now, when the Rebbe spoke about it, he spoke about it because there's a tractate in the Torah, in the Talmud, which is called Yoma, which means a day, the day of Yom Kippur. And that's the tractate which focuses on Yom Kippur. It opens up with this law. The beginning of the tractate is this law that a high priest has to be married. One of the things that people, great scholars, have done over the millennia is to look at the Talmud and look at how the beginning and the end share a theme. So the Rebbe, in this talk, which was in 1970, he went from this idea of the high priest on Yom Kippur to the very end of the tractate, which also deals with Yom Kippur, and showed how it also shares this idea of how Yom Kippur lays bare our consummate wholeness. And so I want to look to this at note 11. The end of the tractate is, and this gets I wouldn't say it's a famous piece of Talmud, but it gets play. Rabbi Kiva said, "How fortunate are you, Israel? Before whom are you purified, and who purifies you?" Right? It's Yom Kippur, purification. There was purification going on in the temple. We come to services, we're davening, we're praying, we're trying to purify ourselves. Who purifies us? And for whom are we being purified? Our Father in heaven. It's your Father in heaven. As it is stated, I will sprinkle purifying water upon you and you shall be purified. It's a verse from Ezekiel. And it says the mikvah of Israel. Now, this is a Talmudic play on words. Mikvah, like hatikva, mikvah means hope. So Jeremiah says, at least it can mean hope. So Jeremiah is saying in the plain interpretation of the verse that the hope of Israel is God. But mikvah, in a different use of the word, it's actually a totally different word. It just sounds exactly the same, which it means to gather. So the mikvah, here the Talmud is saying, Rabbi Kiva is saying, a play on words that God is not only our hope, God is our mikvah. That's what Jeremiah is saying. What's a mikvah? A mikvah is a ritual pool into which when we immerse ourselves for purity. And many people go to the mikvah. Some people go every day. It's go before Yom Kippur is a much more common thing. Before Shabbos, it's a mitzvah. It's actually the biblical mitzvah was for women. And during their cycle, it was a mitzvah for the Kohen Gadol, for the high priest, to go 5 times on Yom Kippur. And anytime there was, I'm not going to deal with it right now. There was there's a type of what we can call a spiritual instability that someone might contract. Different ways. It's called tuma in Hebrew, and a way out of that was through mercy in the mikvah, and also the Torah talks about it, sometimes it was through the Kohen sprinkling water on the person. So the mikvah is a purification pool. So who's our purification pool? Rabbi Kiva says it's God, quoting Jeremiah or paraphrasing Jeremiah. Just as a mikvah purifies the impure, so too the Holy One, blessed be, purifies Israel. So it's a beautiful idea, I guess. I find it that Rabbi Kiva ends off this tractate of Yoma of Yom Kippur about saying we are blessed that God purifies us. Ezekiel said that God sprinkles water on us, and Jeremiah frames it according to the way he's saying it. He frames it as God being our mikvah, so to speak, our ritual pool. So the imagery is I think it's meaningful. Now, before we get into what Rabbi Kiva said, just an interesting connection is that Rabbi Kiva is quoted in the Talmud. If we want to go back to the first. The concept we just finished discussing about the married high priest. Now, a married high priest is someone who saw in his wife, not the high priest or the consummate, any of us. We see in our spouse not only what they bring to us, but that they're our partner by divine design to make a proper impact in the world, make a holy impact in the world in our way. Again, each to their own. Rabbi Kiva is an example of that. Rabbi Kiva was a great leader of the Jewish people in the late 1st and 2nd century. He was tortured to death by the Romans, but he was a leader of tremendous import historically. Now, when he grew up without any Torah study. And it says he was 40 years old before he actually studied anything. He didn't like religious people, sages. And he had a wife, Rachel, who married him, even though he was illiterate. And she saw in him what others couldn't. And she encouraged him. She nurtured him, and he nurtured himself. And he eventually became, from this illiterate shepherd, he became the foremost teacher of the Jewish community. And in that 1st and 2nd centuries, end of the 1st and part of the 2nd century. And the Talmud tells us that he had gone away for studies, and he came home after a long time, and he brought with him, there are thousands of students who are accompanying him because he was their Rebbe, They're a great teacher, and he had been away from home. When they saw his wife, he said to them, to his students, and this is note 12, Rabbi Kiva said to them, my Torah knowledge and yours is actually hers. What I know, I owe to her. What you know, whatever you owe to me, you actually owe to her. And so his quote is an example of seeing in a spouse not only their beauty and how they make you feel good, but to see their partnership and how elemental each is to the other, fulfilling, helping fulfill the unit's impact on the world. Now to get to his quote. He says, he brings, what is that? He says a beautiful thing, that God purifies us. Ezekiel speaks about God sprinkling, purifying water. Jeremiah is that it's God is our mikvah. The Rebbe asked a very simple question. If Rabbi Kiva needs a verse to prove that God purifies us, he doesn't have to go to Ezekiel and Jeremiah. Ezekiel and Jeremiah, the Torah has three categories to it. There's the 5 books of Moses, then there's the prophets, and then there's what's called the writings. And the most elemental, in the scale, they're all holy writings, but in the scale of divinity, the 5 books of Moses are the top. In the Torah portion, we're going to read this Shabbos. In the Torah portion about Yom Kippur, it says, on this day he, meaning God, shall effect atonement for you to cleanse you. Before God, you shall be cleansed from all your sins. What's missing from this? Why would Rabbi Kiva have to go to Ezekiel and Jeremiah to make his point when the Torah portion of Yom Kippur does the same thing? God effects atonement, and our cleansing is before God. So the Rebbe pointed out something that, again, connected to the idea we said before. Yom Kippur, if Yom Kippur is a day that is so powerful that it cleanses us, that's beautiful. But then it's just for Yom Kippur. So it'd be like someone coming into my office and saying, Rabbi, I really screwed up. I want to repent, but I'm going to have to make notes because it's 6 months until Yom Kippur. So only Yom Kippur is the day that's going to afford me cleansing. And I would say to him, you don't need Yom Kippur. You can have cleansing today. It's up to you. Yom Kippur is a day that helps. It facilitates. Why? Because our core is always clean. Our core relationship with God is incorruptible. Our core relationship to holiness is incorruptible. We've got layers upon layers of shtick, and sometimes we totally forget that we have that holy core. And it's our self-image and the way we project and the way we act is totally disconnected from the holy core. And that's a problem. But the holy core is the holy core. That Yom Kippur triggers and enables my holy core, that my essential oneness with God and connectedness with myself, it enables that to come out, and therefore all my mistakes are cast in a different light, because I am who I am. I'm loyal to God, but now I made mistakes and I'm not defined by them. Yom Kippur helps me bring that out, but why can't I bring that out today? It just takes more effort on my part. It's who I am. Yom Kippur is not creating anything in us. Yom Kippur is just revealing what's there. It's when a child does something grievously wrong to a parent. God forbid, it's a terrible thing. And a parent correctly says, I'm reevaluating our relationship. And I'm not going to let this happen. And the child comes and with sincerity and genuineness says, Mom, Dad, I know I did something wrong. I am sorry. I'm going to try to make it up. But truly, I regret what I did. I will not be going back in that direction, and I'm going to show you my actions how I regret it. What more does the parent need? Does a healthy parent need now say, no, I need revenge? But you did it to me, I'm going to get you back. Healthy parent, all a healthy parent wants is that the child understands that it did something wrong. Because the parent-child relationship is also incorruptible. It gets covered with a lot of shtick and a lot of haze and a lot of static often. But it's at its core, if we can touch that, if we can bring that out, there's nothing can cut that. And therefore, the idea of that, what Yom Kippur does, and it's a very, very important distinction to make, and I think this is one of the beauties of we're looking into the spiritual side of things. Every Yom Kippur, I'm sure I talk about it in one way or another. It's not that Yom Kippur is granting us some holiness, cleansing from without. Yes, God is granting us cleansing. Why? Because God is bringing out what we have. God is giving is calling into the fore what has been buried under our shtick. But it's not creating a relationship that's not there. It's not creating a reality that's not there. It's revealing, it's uncovering a reality. So if you look, let's go back to the thing a second. If this was the verse that Rabbi Kiva brought and said, "Oh, you're so lucky, God gives you the cleansing," we'd look at it and we're being on a Sunday morning, we'd say, "Yeah, this is in the Torah portion about Yom Kippur. Yom Kippur is the day that God gives us cleansing, but it's Yom Kippur. What am I going to do a day in April?" So first he brings the verse from Ezekiel. And again, this verse from Ezekiel, it's God saying, "I will sprinkle purifying water upon you and you should be purified." But if you look at the context of that verse in Ezekiel, this is the larger piece. It says, "So says the Lord God, not for your sake do I do this, O house of Israel, but for my holy name, which you have profaned among the nations." Ezekiel is talking about the times when Mashiach comes. And he's saying, at that point, it's not, God is sprinkling this water on us, in other words, cleansing us, but it's not about something that we're in good shape. It's not Yom Kippur. It's God is saying, and we're people who says we have profaned God among the nations. And therefore I will sprinkle clean water upon you, and you'll be clean from all your impurities, and from all your abominations I will cleanse you. In other words, it's not peculiar to Yom Kippur. At the same time, that is, even though it's not about Yom Kippur, it's not about in the temple, but the thing is, it is at the time of Mashiach. So he brings a second one from Jeremiah. And the verse from Jeremiah is also, it says, "God is the mikvah hope of Israel. All that forsake you shall be shamed, and they who turn away from me have forsaken the source of living waters, the Lord." Jeremiah talks about the Jews as having forsaken God. It's the time of the destruction of the temple. Jews are not good shape. This is not the time of Mashiach. It's not Yom Kippur. It's Jews in a bad spiritual shape. And still in all, he says, God is your mikveh, not your source of hope, but which means, if you use the language there, but mikveh meaning your cleansing waters. So Rabbi Kiva brings two verses. He brings both of them, he's moving away from one that is just exclusively Yom Kippur, because it's not about Yom Kippur. Yom Kippur is just a day that brings out our essence. Essentially, we have a total connection with God. And at a time of Mashiach, or a time of our own personal achieving that type of revelation in ourselves, God will show it. What does that mean? What happens? It says, "I will sprinkle purifying waters upon you." When do you sprinkle purifying waters? One of the primary types of what I told you before, it's called tuma. It's a spiritual imbalance, spiritual impurity, but it's not dirt. There's a spiritual imbalance. One of the Torah, as Scripture describes it, a core spiritual imbalance is through coming in contact with death. God is life. Adam and Eve brought death to the world through, as the scripture tells us, through disobeying God. Death began then. And death is a symbol and it's a result of being unplugged from God, because my soul is eternal. And if my body is properly plugged in through my soul to God, my body should also be eternal. It's not, because we're not plugged in properly. Therefore, coming into contact with a corpse, which could be a tremendous mitzvah, it brings a certain spiritual, let's call it a disequilibrium. So therefore, if I did a funeral today, which is a very important thing for me to do, and it would be doing a mitzvah to do it, to be there for a person at the time of their passing, or a family at the time of their need. I could not, if I wanted to go into the temple for something, I couldn't go in today. I'd have to go through a process of purification. Part of it would be the sprinkling of special holy waters. Primarily, this was for a Kohen. I would say primarily, one of the things, a Kohen is not allowed to go to a funeral except for immediate family. But there also there would be this idea of sprinkling of the holy waters. So it's about the idea of undoing the relationship with death. One of the things that the Torah tells us is, you who are attached to God are living. In Torah thinking, if I'm not connected with my relationship to God, if I'm not connected with my relationship to myself, why am I here? What am I meant to accomplish? What's life really about? Then I'm not really living. I'm not dead, God forbid. But as we say, as the Torah says, you who are attached to God are living. And we say that in synagogue, whenever we take the Torah, it says, Atam hadvekim Hashem Elokechem Chaim Kulchem Hayom. If any of you are familiar with that, whenever we take the Torah out, we say this verse, that we're living. So the idea of what Rabbi Kiva is telling us through the two verses is that God is there when we're unplugged. Now, what do? I'm not feeling inspired. I turn to God and saying, I'd love to get closer to you, but I'm not even inspired to do it. I know I'm distant, but I'm lost. Because we fundamentally never lose the connection. A child can feel disconnected from a parent, but the disconnect is only at a more of a surface level. Ultimately, the connection is always there. So what Rabbi Kiva does is he quotes in this section about the purification. The first quote he brings is, I will sprinkle purifying water upon you, and you should be purified, which calls to mind to the Torah Jew, when are you sprinkling purifying water? On someone who came in touch with a corpse. The idea is that we're not plugged in properly to life. We're not properly plugged into life. Normal things, you're not plugged into life. It's not my problem. Plug in, you'll get it. It says, fortunate are you, Israel. And God, he sprinkles you. You don't even have to go into the mikveh. God sprinkles you and will give you inspiration. And will give you an incentive to reconnect, because your connection is there. He's not going to do it all for you, but he's not going to, as a loving parent, he's not going to let you just go blindly at oblivious to the idea that you're a child who has a loving parent looking and waiting for you to return home. And then he brings the second one. It says, Mikveh of Israel is God. There were we. When you're getting sprinkled, you're passive and someone's acting in you. When mikveh, you go into it. Then we will do it. When we engage, God envelops us, like we're enveloped in a mikveh, and we can achieve purity. And then the Rebbe point out a beautiful idea here, which I've heard from, other Hasidim of non-Chabad stripes, of how inspiring they found this perspective of the Rebbe. If you look at this quote, it says, I think you can see that I'm highlighting it. It says, just as a mikveh purifies the impure, so too the Holy One, blessed He purifies Israel. So the Rebbe said, why do you have to say purifies the impure? Purifies. Just as a mikveh purifies, God purifies. What do you think is purifying? Something pure? Because of course it's purifying the impure. That's the point. Pointed out a very important thing, interesting thing in Jewish law, and a very powerful thing in insight for us spiritually and emotionally. It said in Torah law, it's possible to be to have contracted two different types of impurities. There's a whole range of impurities. So let's say someone touched a human corpse, and also it's something that they touched the carcass of an animal, which could also, I mean, there are different types. It's possible to be purified from one thing and not from the other. So, for example, if I woke up this morning and I touched a human corpse, and I'm going to have to make an appointment to go to the temple and get sprinkling of the holy water on me, because going to the mikveh is not going to be enough. But I also touched something where I can go to the mikveh and the mikveh will be enough. I go to the mikveh. So I go to the mikveh as a person with this spiritual disequilibrium, and I come out of the mikveh with less disequilibrium. In other words, I still got work to do. I'm not totally clean, but I took care of something. And this is the way that Rebbe put it. And the way he spoke about it, because there's a record of it. I was a baby at the time. I was 2 years old. I don't remember it from there, but I would look at it. It's beautiful language. He says, a person comes to God and says, I don't have the strength. I don't have the bandwidth to be able to really go through my entire life and cleanse it before you. I just can't do it. I know I did this thing. I want to deal with this. I want to apologize for this. I want to rectify this. I'm going to fix this, and I want to take it forward. I know I have the rest of my life. I got other problems, but I want to deal with the installment plan. The Rebbe says, it says the matter of Jewish law, finding ritual purity allows for an installment plan. You can go to the mikveh and take care of one part of the problems, and then you have another problem still to take care of. But it does not negate, one does not negate the other. So he says, Rabbi Kiva is being very precise in his language. Just as a mikveh purifies the impure. In other words, the impure, even after they're in the mikveh, they're still impure. But the mikveh dealt with an element that they went into the mikveh for. And God says that's good enough. I'm not absolving the other stuff, but if you want to deal with this, we'll deal with this. I'm not going to say, well, just come on, you're dealing with one element and you got so many problems. You did so many, as human beings, if someone has done a bunch of different things wrong to us and come to apologize for one thing, it's a little hollow. I'm not sure I can totally forgive when you got other things you got dealt with that I have to deal with. God says I can compartmentalize, not a problem. There's something you can deal with. Come to me, immerse in me, purify yourself, and I can purify the impure, because this element will be purified. That there's more impurity doesn't matter. It's okay. It doesn't negate this. Again, that's a matter of Jewish law. And to translate that into how we see ourselves is how we see each other, our understanding how God sees us is really part of what the revolution of what this brings to the world. Instead of, if you say to someone, that person does so many things wrong, and now you're going to celebrate one thing they did Judaically. Yeah, we do that. Because there's this idea of mikveh purifying the impure. God doesn't demand 1,000%. We can do 1,000%, and we should never give up on the incremental growth. But the fact that it's incremental today, and there are things I haven't addressed further, do not, it's kind of like the perfect enemy of the good. Do not negate that step because of the larger picture. Jewish law doesn't negate it when it comes to this tumah, this spiritual disequilibrium. And Rabbi Kiva didn't negate it when it came to us and our relationship with God. He said, just like a mikveh purifies the impure, God will purify the impure. In other words, even people who remain impure at some other levels, but they can find purity in what they're addressing today. So I'll leave that here. If there are any questions, we can talk about it. And if not, I hope you all had a wonderful Pesach.
I actually have a question.
Sure.
As you know, when it comes to Judaism, I know very little. You touched the point of the holy water, which is very prevalent in Christianity. I didn't realize it
Where do you
is.
think they get it from?
Well, obviously, now that I know, it would seem logical. Can you expand on the topic holy water? Where does it come from? How is it made? What's the mechanics about it?
We no longer have any service of holy water, but there was a service that's found in it's a few different places you find, but they're probably the most explicit and fleshed out, to the extent Torah was fleshed out, would be in the book of Numbers, in the Torah portion of Chukas, which it would be I don't have. If you have or you can go online and look at it. It's we don't do chapters too much. It should be Numbers chapter 19.
Okay.
Okay.
But what about your color commentaries?
Yeah, well, that's quite a funky thing there. There's going to be a lot of color, but it's a bit. I'm sure you're going to have plenty of questions once you look at it, like
Okay.
everybody else.
Will
All
do
right.
then.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Okay, be well.
Be well.
Bye bye.
Thank you, Mandy.
Bye bye.
Take care. Have a